Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here. My last TMNT 2012 video. I promised I'd do this after my review of the finale episode, the kind of Raphael and the future episodes. Obviously, at that point I hadn't watched or reviewed the last two arcs, which obviously chronologically are meant to be before it, but they completely, I don't know what they did with the schedule for this season. Either way, I have since watched those last two arcs, the monster arc with Rennet and Santi Romero or whatever his name is, and also the kind of crossover with the 80s Turtles arc as well, the last few of the series. Very, very briefly before I get into my overall kind of series in review discussion, the monster arc I thought visually was good, but way too long. Didn't need to be 4 parts. It just felt like far too long for a story that really had no substance to it. It was all about the visuals of that arc, I felt, and the kind of gimmick of being in these different time periods and basically giving the turtles new outfits, as well as the different monsters that they had. There was nothing of substance to the character. The only real thing that interested me was Rennet being back and how they played her off Mikey and their relationship, because obviously that was the one kind of romance setup that they had for Mikey really in the series. As for the kind of crossover arc at the end with the 80s Turtles, it was fine. You know, again, there wasn't really much substance to the plot beyond it just being a kind of crossover once again. This time, obviously, like old Shredder and old Krang coming in here and trying to take things over. Your standard team up, you know, using the dynamics of like how cheesy the original show is versus how, you know, much more modern the current show is, and playing the two lots of turtles off each other. Again, no real character development as such, but so the standout moments really are just those kind of comparison scenes between the different groups. But ultimately, just a fairly standard thing. Again, I don't think it needed to be 3 full episodes, so it felt a little over long for what it was. Especially kind of emphasizing Bebop and Rocksteady and kind of having their, you know, making them actually a threat and then having them be the big turn at the end that turns the things in the Turtles' favor was okay, but nothing particularly interesting. And in a way, getting into the discussion on TMNT 2012 in review, I felt like these two arcs kind of represented the entire run of TMNT 2012 overall. All style, no substance, barely any character development, any notable plot over the course of the entire series. But it looked cool. And that's more or less everything about the show. You guys know when I started doing this that I kind of was pretty into it at the start. I liked it. I was invested in, you know, making this kind of probably my secondary thing on my channel initially. It was like I did Korra, Avatar, and then they did TMNT because they were on at the same time. And that was cool. And I think in a way, the way the ratings on this show went, like it started off with like, for the most part, I think like season 1 got like 3.9 million views per episode, and it kind of went a little up and down, but for the most part it was like 3.9. Most of the season 5 episodes struggled to get 1 million, and that really represents this huge fall across the series. And it wasn't just that like 5 was the sudden drop, it had slowly been going down over time, and it's very much been the same as my interest with the show also. I continued it because it always did kind of like just enough to keep my interest to continue into season 3, into season 4, and into season 5. But some of how season 5 was done really just completely lost me, to the point where like I have so little to say about those kind of final 2 arcs that I discussed just a few minutes ago. There really isn't anything there that interested me all that much. And really, like, it's kind of what I've been saying in almost every single one of my like end of season recaps that I did for like season 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's the same thing every time. The Turtles never had a character arc. I'm talking about Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, Raphael. none of those four characters over the course of like the entirety of the show had a character arc of note, really. They had an episode here or there where they did something with them. Leo, of all of them, probably had the most because, they very much emphasized him as the leader. Splinter kind of passed the torch on to him right at the end. Of course, they did the classic Turtle thing of him being the one to, defeat Shredder in the end. But beyond that, it was always just Leo's the leader, and that's his character. Raph's always the angry one, and he sort of wants to be the leader sometimes. Michelangelo's the dumb one, and he's occasionally smart in very specific scenarios. And then Donatello is the intelligent one with machinery and stuff like that. And that was it. They never really attempted to do anything interesting with the Turtles as individuals or as a group. It was just them going along, always being the heroes of the show, always involved in the fight, and they lost a lot, but somehow managed to win for the most part in the end. It ended up being a situation where, I think I was saying this in season 1, and I'm still saying it now. To me, the most interesting characters in the show were Splinter, Shredder, April, and Karai. Those were the four characters where they actually had something to them. They were the unique characters within the show that I wanted to see more of. Because, to me, it felt like the writers were trying to do something with those characters that they weren't trying to do with the main characters, the Turtles. April and the uniqueness of them kind of, making her a mutant and developing her psychic powers and where they were going with that. Again, they sort of mishandled her as time went on. They didn't use her in a lot of situations, and in the few times they did try and do something with her, they oftentimes did the somewhat unusual thing for the show of like setting up something that seems really interesting. Oh, you could go great places with that, and then kind of just resolving it all in one episode. The best example of that being when like her the kind of her powers kind of took over, the kind of spirit of that kind of alien race kind of took over her, and she ended up basically like atomically like dismantling Donatello in that amazing kind of death scene type thing. And that would have been amazing if they had made that like a big arc that like April is the villain, she's that powerful when under the control of this person, she has killed Donatello. If they had made that like a multi-part arc and just had the Turtles be without Donnie and having to accept for like a couple of episodes that he's gone, that would have been great. But they turned what was such an interesting setup into just one episode, whereas they have like four episodes for that monster arc, 3 episodes for that crossover arc. You have most of the season finales, most of the mid-season finales as well, be multi-part episodes that, while they lead to some, big action or something big happening in the city, still don't have a lot of character stuff, whereas the likes of that one moment, there's so much to it because it's, that there's a sort of romance kind of connection there between April and Donnie in that she's the last person. He's the last person she would ever want to hurt, and here she is kind of effectively killed him. There's so much impact to that, and it just felt like they just wasted it all in a few seconds. The Karai stuff I thought was pretty good for the first couple of seasons, until I think they just got to a point where it's just like, please just have her join the Turtles. You are just unnecessarily having her be this kind of in-between character where she's not good, she's not bad, she's just constantly separate. So by the time they finally committed to her kind of embracing the Turtles as like allies, it was kind of like, fine, okay, about time. Like, are you going to do anything with it? Okay, not really, fine, let's move on. She's just sort of a part of the group, but still not really. So it meant that I think over the course of the entire show, the only thing that I think remained interesting, that was always fascinating when it was on screen, was the Splinter Shredder dynamic. The few setup episodes for this, with like I suppose bringing in like the Young Turtles episode from this season, the flashback episode I think from season 3, I think it was, where the Turtles actually went back in time and saw basically the Orokusaki stuff with Splinter when he was still human. That was good, and it made you care about what happened between these two, that this was a feud, a blood feud between these two characters who hated each other. And you got the impression that at any point, any time those two were in a fight, someone was either going to get badly injured or someone was going to die. And you could see the kind of desperation, you could see the intensity, you could see the anger. And it never really, with any other dynamic hero villain in the show, they never managed to, I think, reach the heights that they managed there. And I think part of that was that, in a way, they waited too long to commit to the idea of like, okay, we're going to kill off Splinter, and we're going to kind of pass on the need to kill Shredder to the Turtles. It felt like they waited way too long to get to that, to the point where it was just like, oh, that's more or less your final thing in the entire series. But it doesn't feel that great because it took so long to get there, which is one of the other problems with the show, of just, I never felt like the writers really attempted to display any sense of progress in terms of how skilled the Turtles were. That never came across to me because they were so up and down constantly with fights. They'd always introduce a villain, and this is an example of like the formatting of the show. Having any sort of plot-focused episodes basically be start of season, mid-season, and end of season. You never get any important episodes as, like, say, episode 7 or something like that. They'd always either be episode 1, 2, 3, episode like 12, 13, 14, or 25, 26, that sort of thing. Those middle gaps between them, you'd never see anything, because those episodes were always filled up with the really kind of frustrating, here's a villain for the week, here's a fight for the week type thing. And it never meant that. It meant that, like, in between arcs, we'd never get development on the characters necessarily. And it just meant that we never got character arcs, really. Plots never got a chance to really have like a larger setup from previous seasons or anything like that. It was always just a case of, here's a new villain, let's hope they maybe bring him back in a future season. Oh wait, 2 seasons later, here he is. Okay, that guy, it's fine. And it was always, I think, just that. Like, I think they should have set it up much sooner, that the Turtles had a real vested interest in wanting to take down Shredder as much as Splinter did. So you made the Turtles' interactions with Splinter just as intense as they were with Shredder as they were Splinter's interactions with Shredder. Waiting until right at the end and really only leaving like one episode to set that up didn't work so well. And it's the same with a lot of like the stuff that they tried to set up, like the Turtles, I think mainly Leonardo being injured at the end of, I think, season 2, and in his recovery at the start of season 3. That could have been really good, but the start of season 3 was so bad. I think that's when we had a lot of the stuff in the farm, and you had that awful, probably one of the worst episodes of the show, the kind of Bigfoot episode with Donnie. I don't know what they were going for with that one. That was an awful episode, and I think they just did not use what they wanted to go for there all that well, in terms of like this big defeat for the Turtles, having to escape from the city and so on. And it was always just a case of that, of like it being very hard to kind of get invested with the Turtles in any situation they were in, because they have so many fights that it's hard to know when you should be like, wait, they could actually get hurt here. Because they seem to always set them up in a fight as being okay, like they can hold their own, but they're going to get hit. They can also get the victory anytime they want. So it was never clear what exactly was going to happen. Whereas the likes of, say, a Splinter, when they had him fight, it was clear that he could basically beat almost any character they came up against. And it was really just characters like Shredder who could match him, and that was the threat for Splinter as a character. And it's that case of they never wrote the Turtles' like fighting style, their strength levels, as like in any way consistent, because it just, depending on what characters were involved, it just completely up and down, and that was just the way the entire show went, basically. So there's stuff like that. As I said, mishandling of a lot of the other minor characters. Like they had bits and pieces here and there, like Leatherhead, I thought, was like his arc that they sort of had was okay, and then they brought him in as like a, you know, character that would team up with the Turtles when the Turtles needed that extra kind of firepower. They did okay with the Mighty Mutanimals as a way to like, okay, here's kind of like those minor characters who were kind of initially villains in their own individual episodes, and now here they are as a team that are kind of friend characters going forward. Stuff like that was okay. But again, it was just the absence of any sort of a like, here is a big emotional arc over a group of episodes for, say, like Raph as a character. They tried to do that in the finale, but the finale is another story. Like, I'll talk about that more towards the end of the video, how I feel about the finale. But you know, there's other stuff to talk about before we get there. I think going back to some of the stuff I said at the start, like I was very invested in this show when it initially started. If you guys go back to my channel in or around the time when the first episode aired, you'll obviously see my episode reviews for the early episodes, but you'll also see that I did lots of like merchandise reviews for stuff like obviously the action figures when they came out over here. I reviewed like the four turtles. I reviewed like the first issue of like the magazine that came out over here, the UK magazine, the UK card game. I got one of the Revoltech turtle figures, which was quite expensive, and I really like that figure still. I still have it. I was invested in the show because I liked the animation style. I think visually, there's not a lot you can really say that's like bad about the visuals of this show. It's a really nicely done 3D show, and it felt like it kind of developed over time. They kept, for the most part, I think, the high quality, decent budget up throughout. It's just the writing intent really let the show down, and just I think in a way, like the lack of ambition, that it was just like, it was always just, oh, we have the Turtles always have those base characters the characterizations to fall back upon. Leo's the leader and so on. And it felt like they just were happy to leave it as that. Like, the kids will be fine with this. We'll sell the toys really well as we introduce like new costumes for all the Turtles. And I think, in a way, that's a lot of how I feel about the show now. It really, really feels like a show to sell toys, more so than this is a show that is an addition to like the, you know, universe of Turtles. This is the 2012 version. Here's its unique story and all the important things about its story. I never really felt like that because there was so little to really be invested in over the course of the run, and I think it's just kind of sad to see that it really failed to build. And I think you could see that in a lot of like the coverage of this show, that I think people wanted to be really, really hardcore fans of this and wanted it to be something really, really good for Turtles. Given that, like, at that time, 2012, there was a lot of other good shows on at the time, and it really felt like a good time for animation, with Korra and so on the air. Unfortunately, it obviously took the route of more being for just pure kids show, and it didn't really offer a lot to anyone who wanted more from this type of a show, like, say, a Korra offers, like an Avatar offers, that sort of thing. They didn't even go down, like, say, the Transformers Prime route, which Transformer shows are often criticized for being like just to sell the toys, and that for sure is something you can level at the original, like Transformers G1. Not necessarily something you can level at Transformers Prime, because there was actually plots, there was character developments, there was a continuity to it. That wasn't here because there were so many standalone episodes that the plot was almost exclusively in the finales, mid-season finales, and season openers. So it's just stuff like that. You know, it didn't also help that, again, the villain stuff wasn't particularly well done, and this again leads into the point of just fighting character strength levels and stuff like that. It's just a case of, like, they had so many villains. The Turtles basically had to defeat almost every villain in nearly every episode, because you had to have Bradford here. You, like, mutated him, like, twice. You know, you had Fishface, or whatever his name was. You eventually introduced Bebop and Rocksteady, and they all just became part of the scenery over time. That there was nothing unique about these fights, because it's not like they set up rivalries between characters where like, oh, like there's this really heavy rivalry between like Mikey and Fishface. Like they've squared off like 5 times, and like Mikey's lost twice, but he's won 3 times, and so it's an actual like big thing going on here that whenever they fight, you kind of care because there's a bit of a rivalry. No, the way they did the fights just felt very kind of thoughtless, and it's just like, oh, we'll have some action here because we have to have action because it's Turtles. Like, I don't know what this show would do if they couldn't spend like 5 minutes in an episode on a fight. I don't know if they'd be able to fill in an episode that didn't mostly have action. But the few times when they kind of almost did that, it was really good in a way. Like the flashback episode where the Turtles were younger, like that didn't have a lot of fighting in it. The action was very kind of character centric because you were telling the story. Equally, the episode where we got like the Orokusaki kind of backstory, that's that Hamato Yoshi backstory, through the time traveling, that didn't have like a ton of action in it. Like it had like energetic moments because it was a dramatic backstory, but it's an example of just them treating those action moments with a different kind of approach than, say, fight number 400 with like Zever and like Fishface or something like that. So there's lots of stuff like that. I suppose I'll bring up the finale now. Again, you know how I feel about it because I reviewed it when it came out, but the more and more I think about that, the more and more I'm like, what on earth were they thinking with this? Like, I think the biggest thing, looking back on this, is that at this point, I don't feel particularly strongly about the show. If I was to give the show a rating out of 10, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. I think it leans towards good, but only like just about. I still would be like, it's good, you'll probably get something out of it if you're a Turtles fan, but it's not particularly like amazing. You can count on your hands the number of like really, really good episodes there are in this show. And honestly, you'd probably place a recommendation with like, skip a good like 50 episodes from the series if you want to get through it and enjoy yourself type thing. And a lot of that is because I only give it a 6 out of 10 is because it doesn't end well at all. The lack of like any sort of like proper epilogue, I think, really, really affects the show. Obviously, the big problem with the 3-parter, or was it 4 parts, is that they don't explain the setup for what exactly happened. They roughly explain to you that like a mutagen bomb went off in New York and the Turtles couldn't stop it and it affected everyone and separated everyone and all this stuff happened. But they don't explain what it was that actually caused that mutagen bomb, which villain set it off, what organization set it off. And they don't even like place it as some sort of a thing where like they'll go back and retroactively find out what happened. It's just, this is the setup for the finale that we've chosen. And the finale they've chosen just made no sense because it didn't feature April, it didn't feature Casey, apart from like really minor references to them. Whereas I think in the end what most people wanted, what I got from like just the view of some of the fan base, is that they wanted, I think, a little bit more of a happy ending because the show, apart from a few times, wasn't tonally ever really that dark. Like, of course, the death of Splinter was a dark moment, and at times there were some kind of like, oh god, that person got mutated quite horribly. But in general, it had this very lighthearted tone, I think, throughout most of it, while still being able to, with the action and everyone uses bladed weapons for the most part, do some of that stuff. It didn't really feel like the sort of show that needed to have that kind of like gritty ending where like, oh, everyone's old now and all this bad stuff has gone down, but here's a ray of hope right at the end. I think people wanted to just see like, here's the relationships we didn't really cover all that much, and here's like Leo and Karai, here's Raph and Mona Lisa, here's Mikey and Rennet, Donnie and April finally, you know, they do something with that relationship. And it's just the fact that come the end of the show, plot points that they'd sort of set up, like the kind of love triangle stuff with like Mike, Donnie, Casey and April, it's just left still there, really vague. Donnie still likes April, Casey still likes April, and April still sort of likes both of them, but we're just never clear what the dynamic is. Just the fact that they felt that it was like a good thing to just not feature some of our other main cast members in that final episode. And that they kind of felt that, yeah, ending the show, it's just about ending the 4 Turtles arcs. When I think it's pretty fair to say that the best characters in the show were not the Turtles necessarily. So it's just this thing I always think about those episodes, and it's just, wow, how did they get that so wrong? Like, what were they thinking with their approach in those episodes? Because it is so different. Like, the format of season 5 didn't really work for the finale episodes. Having it just be this kind of arc, and especially the placement of it, if you just watch it in like the airing schedule from Nickelodeon as like more or less like the like third from last arc in terms of what aired on Nickelodeon, it doesn't work at all. Because there's no setup for it. Like, I could have, I think, got behind this finale if they had an actual like present day epilogue type thing, where like, this is the end of most of our dramas for now. Here's our main and minor characters together. Here's just like a happy ending. And then maybe we come back for another arc, and then something really serious happens where like all the villains team up, the mutagen bomb goes off, the Turtles are unable to stop it, and it leads to this dark future that happens, which sets up the Raph episodes. That I perhaps could have got behind. I perhaps even could have got behind it if they had gone on a little bit more past that and be like, okay, we now need to investigate retroactively what did happen. Are those people who set off the bombs still out there? Can we stop them? Can we get the city back? Is there any way to like reverse things? And you know, get some sense of closure on that. The ending of them like sort of like finding this kind of oasis of kind of hope at the end, and this kind of place that they kind of came together and remember. It's like, okay, that's a nice resolution to these 3 episodes, but as a resolution to the entire series, it's not particularly good. And when I really feel for like really like a capstone on this series, it's all the epilogue, the kind of final moments was really, I think, all they had to attempt to place any sort of a good ending moment on the series. And they didn't get it right. I think it's just a perfect example of like, yeah, the show really wasn't meant to be, in a way. Like, it just, the direction was just kind of all wrong at a certain point. And I think you saw that with the ratings and how it dropped off over time, and less people cared as each season went on, and people realized that it wasn't going to be anything resembling a character-driven show, anything resembling a plot-driven show. It was just going to be sort of fun each week with the Turtles. Repetitive, the same fight more or less every week, and then, as I said, premieres, mid-season, finales, that's when we're going to get plot stuff. And it's not going to be particularly good plot stuff. It's not going to really lead to character development. It's just going to be your kind of standard cookie cutter, you know, license, you know, notable universe doing something with its characters, and that's it. The Krang invade, here's the Triceratons invading, that's it. Just sort of big, generic, we've taken over kind of plots. Whereas, in many ways, I think what could have become like an amazing arc in this show is something as simple as just a turtle like becoming disenfranchised and like leaving for a few episodes, and just having to deal with like the turtles down to a group of 3, and one of the turtles off on their own for like a good bit, doing their own thing off on their own. And I think they could have done something like that with like the idea of like a Raph maybe going off on his own, maybe a Leo after some of his injuries really just kind of leaving the group and then coming back at a key moment, because it could have created this great dynamic over the course of a season to like see the team have to adapt to being one turtle down, and the few moments where maybe they see Leo and he doesn't join them again, but then he eventually does. There were options to do things, but they just never seem to. And before I start heavily repeating myself, I'm going to bring this to a close. With the idea of, like, yeah, as I said, out of 10, I think realistically I'd give it a 6 out of 10. That it's solid, it's okay. I definitely, in any recommendation of this show, heavily recommend people to check out like episode lists and skip the episodes that don't sound very interesting, and skip as much as you need to, and just only look at the key moments that you need. This is not a show, if you are first getting into it, that you need to watch every single episode of, because it's in a way just really not worth the amount of time that you would put into watching that amount of episodes. And the effect I think that this show has had is that, like, I don't know if I'm particularly excited for the next Turtle show. I'm sort of excited about it being 2D rather than 3D animated, but in terms of writing and the potential for character and plots, I don't know if I feel like I'll get anything. So right now, I'm not even sure when it comes out if I'll do a video on it. That's sort of where I'm at with Turtles at this point. I'm just like, wow, this show has like had that much of an effect where I'm kind of just like, I am done with Turtles for a while. That's the effect that this has had on me. That it's just this really, really, average show in the end. After the amount of potential it had at the start, where it went, where it ended, I just don't know what happened with this. So that's sort of where I'm at. I'm glad that I, in the end, have touched at least on every single episode of this show, that I continued reviewing the full thing, because it I think, apart from my Avatar stuff, it probably has been one of the more like consistent, like, every time I put up a Turtles review, I felt like the views for my channel and the size of my channel was actually okay in terms of views and likes and stuff like that. It felt like, people wanted to see my thoughts on the episodes, even though I think from probably about midway through season 2, I have been fairly critical and negative about the show. But at the same time, when there has been a solid episode, I have praised it. Like, I feel like I always tend to go into like Turtles like more or less after that midway through season 2 point of just like, okay, new episode, let's see what this is about. And I've just kind of been like, impress me show, not really expecting to be impressed. So the few times when there was an episode that was good, it was kind of like, oh, well, actually, here's them showing that they can actually do something. But yeah, so I'm going to end it there. In the comments, let me know, overall, looking back on TMNT 2012, how do you view it? Do you think it was a success? Do you think it was a failure? And how do you feel, I suppose, in relation to what I've had to say about it? Do you disagree with how harsh I was on it overall? Or do you agree with me? That's the sort of stuff I want to see. I really want to see a proper discussion in the comments about the strengths and weaknesses of this show, and potentially what they need to go and fix in a new show coming out. But yeah, that's been it. My final TMNT 2012 video on my channel. So yeah, thanks for watching. If any of you have watched all the reviews, thanks very much for watching that. But bye.